Today we're talking about dual career partnerships and what that looks like and what that means, and how we navigate and balance or don't balance in all kinds of different spaces. So students, as per usual, we definitely want to make sure we address things that you're curious about or want to learn about. But let's go around and have folks introduce themselves. I'll have our corporate folks go first, and I'll just point through my little boxes here. Annette, would you start us off?
My name is Annettes Story. I'm a pipeline engineer for Marathon Petroleum. I live and work up in North Dakota. I graduated from UT in December of 2009 with a chemical engineering degree. And so, yeah, a job offer with Schlumberger brought me up here, and I haven't left since.
Awesome. Thanks, Annette. Chandler.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chandler Elliott. I am a university recruiting manager here at Texas Instruments. I graduated from UT in 2015 with my communications degree. And while I'm not an engineer by trade, my whole role is centered around working with engineering faculty and staff at awesome universities like UT and others around the country to bring in the next generation of engineers into our company. So I spend a lot of time with faculty, staff, students, engineers at our company, and I've learned a lot by just osmosis. So I'm excited to be here with y'all today.
Awesome. Thanks, Chandler. Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela Bose, and I am an aerospace engineer at NASA Langley Research Center, which is in Hampton, Virginia. I have a master's degree from UT, and from 2001, so a while ago now, and a bachelor's degree from Purdue, also in aerospace engineering. So.
The beauty of us being able to bring in people from all over the place, because we normally don't get to see Annette and Angela, so this is great. Hat, we miss seeing your face in person, but it's great to have you with us today.
Right. Well, and it's cool for me to get to see people who I normally wouldn't see because they're not here in Austin. That's awesome. I'm Pat Massey. I'm currently at IBM. I graduated, I hesitate to say, in 1986. So none of y'all were around, but, and I have a degree in electrical engineering, and I have spent my career doing things that are directly related to electrical engineering and probably as far away from electrical engineering as you can get, and everything in between over the last 35 plus years. So I'm currently a vice president of a program management organization in a product team at IBM, but I've done a lot of different things too.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. Today, our topic is dual career partnerships and navigating those, and what does that mean? I know I had to define that a little bit with some students of what does that mean, dual career partnerships? Is that like I have two careers, or what are we doing with that? And I know that wasn't necessarily something when I was in school I really thought a whole lot about until I actually got close to graduation. And I had a boyfriend at the time who now has since become my husband. But we were at two different universities trying to navigate the process of interviewing and exploring jobs in parallel and sort of together. And then since then have kind of navigated our twists and turns in our careers over time. So I'd love to hear a little bit from each of our fabulous volunteers about their story and their dual career partnership navigation, and anything you might want to share in that space to kick us off and kind of set the stage, and then we'll open it up to you students for questions. I always have a lot of questions, but I want to make sure that you all have time to ask questions. But maybe we can start with stories, and any of you are welcome to kick us off with that.
Well, I can go. So a big part of why I am still in North Dakota is because of my husband. He is not from here either. We both moved here during, I guess we call it the shale boom. So the Bakken shale It's not even actually a shale, but none of y'all are petroleum engineers, so I won't get into it. But anyway, it was booming starting in about 2009-ish, up until 2015, slowed it down, picked up, and then obviously everything came to a screeching halt last year. But he loves it here, absolutely loves North Dakota, and I like it. And so, you know, lesson one of marriage is compromises. You know, right from the bat, when we got engaged, I said, well, you know, I would like the option of staying home with kids if I ever wanted that. And therefore, I want you to be in a career that makes the most sense for you. I don't want you to come back to Houston with me, work somewhere that you're not happy, sit in traffic every day. And so we defined that very early on in our engagement. And so just with anything, communication, you got to put your expectations out there from the start. And, you know, if not before you get engaged, but definitely when you do get engaged, it's important, and it's going to set the trajectory for the rest of your career, really.
So good lesson right off the bat there, that compromise and communication are important. Thanks, Annette.
Mind going second?
Go for it.
So I have a little bit of a saga. My husband and I, we started dating when we were in undergrad, and he's a year older, so he was graduating first and wanted to go to grad school. And so the plan had been for me to get a job and he would follow me. But then the reality was he hated where he ended up being at grad school, and that really threw him for a loop. He had to figure himself out. And so I just ended up getting a job where I wanted to go, and we navigated long distance then through 4.5 years, actually, with a couple breakups in there, and kind of trying to figure out, you know, as he had his own goals and I had my own goals, like how we could get into the same place. And so definitely I wasn't willing to just move to be somewhere with somebody. I wanted to make sure there were reasons, you know, that were my own reasons for being there. So he ultimately ended up following me out to a job when I was out in California with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And then after we'd been there and we were married and everything, he had a good opportunity out here at Massey Langley. So that's how I decided to follow him here. But so kind of different, again, you know, definitely agree with Annette. You need to have a lot of communication about what you both want. We both are kind of in specific fields. So we had talked about different locations where we might both be able to get a job, and, you know, had to kind of tailor our job searches to those and understand that we might have to take turns, you know. So this job wasn't, you know, my first choice, but I knew it was kind of his turn to have a first choice. And also there were it's closer to family. We have family on the East Coast, you know, so there were other reasons to kind of come here as well. And so, and I would say, even if it's not like your top job, you can make good things out of any opportunity. And so that's what I've kind of navigated over the years. This has provided me a lot of balance with having kids and kind of having the work-life picture that I want to have. And I don't know that I would have had that in the other job. And so you kind of trade-offs as well. But so definitely, I think you have different things you're going to have to navigate, and communicating, you know, what you want and what's important to you is really a good thing as you do that. And there might be bumps in the road, and that's okay. So we're both pretty stubborn. That's how we manage to get through it.
I think there's always bumps in the road. Sometimes they're the little bumps, sometimes they are big bumps, but we figure out as problem solvers how to twist and turn and navigate. That's true. Chandler?
Yeah, so kind of similar to Angela. My boyfriend and I were both, or now husband at the time, we're both from Austin originally. So similar to you, Sonia, we had never left and had the desire to go somewhere. I was graduating 2 years before him. And so that's kind of enough time where, you know, if you're 2 years before you graduate, you might not know where do you want to go or what do you want to do. So we had started kind of the job search process independently of each other. I think it was important to both of us to not have too much of the following, or well, why don't you decide and I'll just try to search wherever you are. Let's both find opportunities that we are both really excited about, and then see where we can hopefully throw a dart at the dartboard of a map and they land in the same place. It was, I was job searching. I found my offer with TI. That was actually the first job offer that I got, and I was so excited about it. It's going to be in Dallas. It was close enough to Austin, still a new city. I was like, I'm going to do it, right? And he was considering going up to New York at the time, and we said, well, we'll figure it out, right? And if that's what you are really excited about, then we could, find a way, right? That was all we had sort of defined at that point, kind of up in the air, right? And there was enough time in between when I was going to be starting my career and when he was graduating and would be going anyway. So fortunately, how it ended up panning out was I started my career in Dallas, and we were long distance for a couple of years, and the New York idea sort of fell through pretty quickly. The first trip he actually took to New York, and finding out that being born and raised in Texas and going up to New York to seeing what you could afford was what you're getting, that got shot down pretty quickly. So he ended up coming to Dallas to kind of be with me. And fortunately, that 2 years was, great for my career. It was, long distance is never an easy thing to do, but it just kind of allowed that time, for me to focus on that one thing and getting established and making my own friends in a new city. And there were a lot of pluses to it. It's never something that's fun to encounter with your partner, but I wouldn't trade it by any means. He came up to Dallas. We had a couple years there, and then actually his job opportunity called him back to Austin. So we moved back to where we had grown up and lived our whole life. So now we're both here in Austin working remotely. So it's funny how it kind of ended up being full circle, but something that we did pan out that was important to both of us, while it felt ambiguous at the time, was that, prioritizing what we wanted to do and not making huge sacrifices that early on was really important to us. We were both first generation college students and had worked way too hard, to go through our degrees to settle for a job that we weren't really happy with. Right. So we just kind of kept that lens throughout. And looking back now, 6 years later, it all panned out the way it was supposed to.
Awesome. Thanks, Chandler. Pat.
Yeah, so definitely agree on communication and compromise, and don't assume that you know what their thoughts are in terms of relative importance or relative priorities. In our case, so when I graduated, my husband was already working at IBM. And so I really only looked for jobs in Austin, and that was fine. And I hired on at IBM. Over the years, as I was growing in the ranks at IBM and looking for the promotion into, my next promotion would have been an executive promotion. This was back in the days where there weren't conference calls and working remote and that sort of thing. So it was really unusual for an executive to not be located where their team was. And so I was limited to the number of executive roles in Austin. And, but my boss was trying to find other roles for me. And some of you may have heard that IBM stands for I've been moved, because so many people who work for IBM end up moving all over the place depending on where the job is. And there is one example in that time period where my boss found a job for me in Poughkeepsie, New York, which is actually where I grew up. And I really didn't have any desire to go back to Poughkeepsie, New York. But if it meant a promotion, it was something I wanted to consider. And I remember going home and telling my husband, hey, man, my boss found me a job in Poughkeepsie. It's going to be this kind of a job or whatever. And my husband said, man, that sounds really good. He said, I'm going to miss you a lot. And so I kind of had my answer that the Alabama boy was not really interested in moving to the frozen north. And I really didn't want to either. But we were trying to figure out those trade-offs. And so rather than limit my career or move, I actually changed companies to a company that was larger, that had more executive opportunities, and whose headquarters is here in Austin. So one of the reasons they wanted to send me to Poughkeepsie, New York, was because it's really close to Armonk, New York, which is where the headquarters for IBM is. And when you're up there, then you can go and get groomed and head shaped and all that with, you know, the executive stuff. So I actually moved to Dell. Dell was right here in Austin. Their headquarters is here. If somebody wanted me to go and get groomed or shaped, then I wouldn't have to go, you know, far from home. And it was a good move. And he was very supportive of that. He wanted me to be able to grow in my career. Fast forward to a year and a half ago, I changed jobs where my boss is in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she was saying, "Nan, we really would like you to be here because of the nature of the job and things like that." And at that point, now my husband is saying, maybe it's time for me to, you know, maybe I can see if I can move my job to Raleigh because it's all IBM. Maybe I can do my job from Raleigh. Maybe it's time for me to stop working for a while, and I'll pack your lunch and I'll drive you to work and I'll take care of you so you can go and be successful. Long story short, when he started talking to his leadership team about the fact that I was being pulled to Raleigh, they kind of freaked out because he's pretty important in his job. And their general manager went and talked to my general manager and said, "Do you really need Pat to go to Raleigh?" And they said, "Well, let's make a deal. Let's see if Pat can do her job from Austin for about a year." And that was a month before COVID hit. And we all got to see if we could do our job from home. And needless to say, nobody's calling me and telling me that I need to move to Raleigh right now. I would encourage you, though, to have an explicit conversation about priority, because there's actually a person that I know of here in Austin who she has a lot of potential. And her manager was working with her on that potential and offering, you know, maybe you should consider this kind of a job or that kind of a job. And she was like, "No, I really think that, you know, my husband's job is the priority." And the manager said, "Well, have you asked him that?" And she said, "No, I just kind of assumed that he was on his path and that I would just make sure I fit in." And she went home and she had that conversation with her husband. And he said, "You know what? I think you're going to move faster than I will. And I want you to try that." And so she hadn't actually asked the question. She just had that assumption. So the communication part and explicitly asking, I think, is super important to make sure that you don't miss out on an opportunity where your partner may be willing to, whether it's a permanent. I always think your career, my husband kind of took that position with me. I think you've got the most growth potential, and I'm not going to try and move you somewhere where that's going to inhibit that. But I also have a friend who, her and her husband have actually taken turns. And when the kids were small, for like the first 6 years until they got in school, she was at home. She was a really darn good engineer at Dell. And I knew her right up until the day that she delivered her first baby, and then she left for about 6 years and stayed home with the kids. But then they made a deal, and the minute the kids were both in school, her husband took over, and she's been working. She's in the aerospace engineering industry somewhere, and having a great time. I don't know if they're going to trade back again or not. I think he's actually having a great time being a house dad or whatever. But they made that deal up front as well. And I have to mention, my brother works for Jet Propulsion Labs, and I'm a big fan. So all the Mars stuff, I get all the updates on all the Mars projects.
That's funny. Well, I have to laugh because I think that sometimes also you just have this expectation of, like, I just knew my job, I wasn't going to leave, and my husband just knows me. And so he also just knew, I got to keep my job here in Austin. So when we moved to Austin for my job. He found a job and followed. And then when the company that he worked for here changed they moved their whole facility to the Woodlands. I was like, I'll see you on the weekends, because I wasn't going. And he knew that, but we were going to be okay, with him going for a while he looked for a job. He ended up finding a job before he had to do that. But I think having those conversations and I think understanding your priorities, for sure, understanding what you enjoy and love. And I wasn't going to leave my job doing what I'm doing because I love it, and I'm not going to find that same thing somewhere else. So being clear on that was important.
And even if it's not, well, maybe I should say this differently. It's not just about location. It's also about the type of job and the workload. We've gone through phases where I knew if I signed up for some particular assignment, it was going to consume me. Yes, I would still live here and I would still at some point end up sharing a pillow, but there might be long periods of time where I was just going to be completely buried. And before I made those kinds of decisions, we pretty much talk about every job transition that I make. He's been growing in his job over the same period of time to varying levels of responsibility within the same organization, while I've gone all over the place and learned a bajillion different things. And every one of those transitions we've had a conversation about. And I'm actually in the middle of one right now. I'm today and tomorrow rolling out a change in my organization where they're not actually going to need my role anymore. And so I'm starting to talk to some people about what my next job would be. And I'm bouncing it off of him, and we're talking about pros and cons. And actually, when I first came back to IBM, the job that got me back to IBM was one that was based in Houston, but we agreed I wouldn't move. But we also agreed that I would hit the road every Sunday night or Monday morning and drive down, and I would be back Wednesday night or Thursday night. And he was okay with that. And we agreed that that would be a 2 to 3 year commitment, and we were okay with that. But we had to work all that out up front, so nobody was surprised.
No, that's a great point. I've had opportunities for different roles that would be, significantly more time consuming, or just like on call on the weekends. And we have 2 small children right now. They're 3 and 1. And it's not a part of my life choices right now. I know it would look great in the long run on a resume, but I also strongly believe in, being good at what I'm doing right now and continuing to build my skills there isn't going to hinder my career either.
And I think, we're talking about a few things on this that I'll throw out there, and students, we can take your questions. We heard some that are at the same company, and so how does that navigate? We talked about the communication and priorities throughout the time of who gets to go where, and how do you navigate all that? I'll just throw in a couple other things when we think about the dual career space that I've lived. Divide and conquer on so many different things, and how does that work? I think with my kids, I've become the academic parent, and my husband is the extracurricular parent. So when it came to things like band, that would all fall within his space. So any emails coming about band or sports or after school things, I ignored them because that took time off my plate, and he would handle. And anything related to school, my one kid just had the SAT today, and anything that's related to school stuff, that is me. And so it's a divide and conquer. Same thing on like house stuff, right? So I don't touch the bills that early on. He learned that that's not a priority in my world. So if bills are to get paid, he's going to do it. I'm okay with that. There's some, and then I do take care of other things. And so figuring out that balance along the way, especially when you're both working, can be really important, so that you have the time to do the things that you want to do and take care of yourself. So that just because there's 2 of you sometimes doesn't mean that there's half of the work, but you have that opportunity to divide and conquer in a lot of different ways. And I see that Pauline has thrown in a question there. So let's go to that. Did you tell the company you're working for that you didn't want to move, or just that you didn't want to move at all?
In IBM, we actually have it loaded in something called our leadership profile, which indicates, are we willing to relocate? If so, what's the timing, both in terms of when would you be willing to go and how long would you be willing to take an assignment, as well as you can specify geographies and you can put that all in your leadership profile. And for quite a while through my career, that part of my profile said that I am not mobile. But in recent years, my daughter has grown, she's off doing her own thing. I have changed that to mobile. I haven't specified where, but there's definitely some places I probably wouldn't want to go, but I don't want to close the door on conversations that, even if they don't lead to something that I would and eventually say yes to, any kind of conversations like that, if handled appropriately, just add to your network. And it's just always a good idea to keep the door open for those.
Yep, we have the same thing at Marathon. We have a profile that says open to relocation or not, and it comes up in our annual review generally with our managers, and just depends on your relationship with your manager too, how often you speak throughout the year, but yeah, same thing.
Something where it's in a profile, but definitely I would encourage like what Pat is saying, where you don't close the door to those kinds of conversations. And there's always negotiable aspects of any job opportunity. So if somebody really wants you for a role, then you can often negotiate how that looks like what she just said, where she negotiated this past year being, not in person and being remote. And so actually when we made the move for us to move here for my husband's role, that was what I went and I approached. I said, hey, my husband has this great job opportunity. Can I keep doing my job and do it remotely from there? And we worked through all of that. And that's how we made the decision that we were actually going to move, was me being remote, still working at the job I was working. And that fell through like 2 weeks before we moved. And so I would say, like, definitely, if you kind of going back to what something Chandler said, where you both prioritize and have communication about what you want. If I had made that decision to move entirely on, trying to make my husband happy, then I would have really resented him at that point in time when things didn't come through the way I thought they were going to with my own job. And so, I had other reasons for that move as well, and that I felt like where I was okay with. So definitely, make sure you're not leaving a piece of yourself somewhere, that you are communicating and you're keeping elements in your moves and you're navigating that work for both of you.
Yeah, totally agree. And for Trisha's kind of comment, and I was definitely going to chime in on this as like a first job or like internship perspective when you're considering, if you're like me and Sonny, we've never left Austin, we don't want to, what does that look like? A lot of companies, and I'm sure IBM and Marathon and everyone here are similar. When you're in those discussions on if it's an internship or a full-time role, you have a similar sort of option, and like it's a question that we ask, right? Are you geographically flexible? And for many roles at TI and many companies, you don't have to be. Our corporate headquarters is in Dallas. We have locations in Arizona, California. Satellite sites around the country. You could be placed in one of those and you could stay there as long as you would like. Others, it's quite the opposite. You are required to be geographically flexible. It's not a negotiable thing. If you're going to be in a technical sales job or working in the field, right, you need that flexibility. So it oftentimes depends on the nature of the role. But based on kind of what's more important to you, the where or the what or the who, right, you can lay that out there and have those discussions early on in the job search process. I've had many students interact with me at many universities in similar conversations with their partners saying, hey, location's really important to me. Are you going to be able to provide me an opportunity here in Austin? And, they lead with that, right? And that's perfectly okay. And it's either a yes or a no, right? But I think the more you can be upfront with that information, the better, rather than, getting so far in the interview process and getting really excited and finding out, oh, you're going to have to go to Manchester, New Hampshire, right? And like, that's the only place this job is located. And that's not where I wanted to go, right? So I think the more transparent you can be upfront, it'll be a smoother experience for both you and the interview process with that company.
And I'll just share my personal example related to that a little bit, in that when James, my boyfriend at the time, and I were both graduating, again, both at different universities, I had a great relationship with a recruiter out of Texas, Eastman, up in Longview, Texas. And I made it very clear that my boyfriend and I were headed down this road together. And they ended up making him an offer as well because they wanted me. But my husband very much felt they took him because they wanted me. They didn't necessarily take him because they wanted him. And so this feeling for him of, I want to go somewhere where they want me also, weighed heavy on him. And so we ended up, we both had offers from Dow where we had co-opted, and both were very familiar with and excited about there as well. And that's where we ended up going, because Dow wanted us both as individuals for who we were. And it was just a different setup. But like Chandler said, we were very upfront with companies at the get-go. And we had people tell us, don't do that. But we were headed to the same place. So there was no reason to not have that conversation, especially somewhere like Longview, Texas, which is not near anything. And that's the only company there for chemical engineers. And so it was really important to have that conversation up front. But then at the end of the day, having that conversation about what makes sense and why does it make sense for both of us as individuals heading into our careers. Questions, students? What else do you want to know? Ask us anything.
I have a question. I would have typed it in the chat, but I don't know how to form a sentence. So hopefully this question comes out right. So say you graduate single and you make decisions about your career, such as, oh yeah, I am open to traveling or open to moving. And then you meet a significant other and stuff happens and those views change and you realize, maybe I am not exactly open to moving. Then what? Like, how do you proceed with that? Because now your personal life with your significant other and your work life are like on opposite sides of the spectrum.
Annette?
I mean, I have experience exactly with that. I met my husband at Schlumberger. For those of you that don't know, Schlumberger is a very intense company to work for, intense place to start your career. So I was a field engineer for almost 3 years, and by year 3, I was done. I didn't want to work there anymore. The opportunities that were presented as far as next steps were not what I wanted. I had a job opportunity back in Houston. And so my husband and I were not engaged yet, and he wasn't ready to be engaged. And I said, well, look, I'm going to keep working on my career then. But like I said, so I did move back to Houston briefly, and then we got engaged, and, we had that conversation of, we want to prioritize location. We want to prioritize his job. So luckily it wasn't hard to find a job here, but I mean, it was just more of a mindset change for me internally, because I had to get a new job. But coming into my job at now Marathon, we were Tesoro at the time. I wanted to work here. I wanted to be here. And at the time I said I was somewhat flexible on location, but I wanted to obviously have conversations with my husband before any job role changes. So for me, it was more of an internal mindset. And that was a really big hurdle for me to jump at the time, because I was very, I'm a female engineer and I'm an independent woman and I'm not going to follow a man anywhere. And here I am. But honestly, I'm very happy with my choices. I don't regret any of them. I have a great career at Marathon. So it's funny. You think you know exactly what you want, but you often don't.
And it could be flipped, right? It could
Yep.
be your situation where it's the opposite of that, where your partner feels that and makes that mind shift too. But
Also, I think starting your career without that and then having to adjust later, depending on the company that you're at, if you've been building your foundation with that organization and establishing yourself and your worth and your importance, then you may have a negotiating perspective that you can say, well, my partner is going here, and if you still want to keep me involved in this project, then you'll support me as I also move with my partner, right? And some companies will. I've done that for employees on my team before. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to hear that Joe graduated and got his PhD and he's going to go work. That's great. I've been hearing about that for the last 3 years. But please tell me you're not leaving, because we will die without you. And then we have a conversation about how we can keep her on board, and she'll do it from remote wherever.
And I will say that's a big benefit of working for a big corporation too. Obviously that's a lot more feasible. The company I was with at the time in Houston, when I made the decision to come back here, was a lot smaller, and it just wouldn't have worked. But with big corporations, and now post COVID, we know we can work efficiently remotely. And so,
I was just going to say that, just getting established, right? And if you can establish kind of your commitment and great performance in that role or at that level, many teams and organizations will do what it takes to keep you, right? That's what they did with me, because TI is based out of Dallas. I'm based out of Dallas, but they let me come to Austin because I was going to come to UT campus every week and do these great things. And I haven't been to campus at all this year or last year. Right?
We'll sign off that you've been there a lot.
Yeah.
Funny. What else, students?
Sorry.
What else can we answer?
how do you nicely tell your boyfriend that your career is more important?
That's what I did. So, I mean, with my story, I was graduating a couple of years before. My boyfriend at the time was a little non-committal. Yeah, I might go to New York. And I mean, I kind of laid it out. Okay, well, I'm going to go here because I have this job that I'm really excited about, and maybe it'll work out, right? And thankfully it did. But at that time, I kind of had to lay it out there, right? Like, I'm going to accept this offer because I'm really excited about it, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I think being a woman in a technical field, there may be data around it that says, given the drive for improving diversity across the board at companies who hire engineers, you may have a brighter future just because you will be more heavily recruited than he will. So, look for the data as well. It doesn't just have to be based on opinion. I mean, and I think that's what happened with this husband and wife that I was talking about, right? He's a smart guy, but he hasn't moved as quickly as she has. And she's really, really smart, but she's also got sponsors and folks really paying attention to giving her the opportunities to grow and demonstrate her capability. And she will probably go farther than he will, even if they're exactly the same coming in.
I also don't think it should be about just, your growth and your career potential. It has to be personal as well,
Yep.
Not necessarily the growth and career potential. So both of you are going to have shifts and zigzags in how things go. So at one point in time, your career might have a priority, and then later you might not want it to have as much priority. Like Annette was saying, you have little kids, and so you're ready to kind of put things a little bit slower and on hold for a while and let him have the priority. And so I mean, it's not static. Like, don't think that just because maybe it's important to you right now and you're telling him, hey, this is more important, that's the way it's always going to be. And that might involve a little bit of a mindset shift when it happens. But that's kind of true. With all sorts of life changes, you're going to probably have a little bit of shift that you have to kind of grapple with and say, is this where I want to be? What is it like? And kind of reassess the whole situation and have that conversation again with each other.
Yeah, very true. And career growth doesn't only get measured on a vertical scale. I recently actually plotted out my 35 plus years, and it goes up for a bit and it stays flat for a bit and it goes down for a bit and then it goes back up again for a while. And it's a very weird looking path. But there were reasons for staying flat for a while. There were reasons for dropping back down. Some of them were job related, so that I could go learn something new and be less at risk, because, you know, if you're only onward and upward in every new step, you're also learning a lot of new things. You can potentially be disadvantaged next to your peers who've been doing that for a while. And so sometimes it's good to just stay flat or maybe even drop down so that you can go learn that safely. There were times where that kind of a transition was more personal and not career growth related, when I just wanted to spend some more time with my daughter and realized that I wasn't enough. I was penciling her in as a one-on-one and checking on her spelling tests, and I wasn't hearing about what was going on in her, you know, her actual life. And, you know, and then there's times where you move right along for a little while.
And you may have a partner that says, I would love to stay home. You go right ahead and go make all, I mean, that's what mine, he's like, I wish you would make all that money and I wish they paid you more at the university because I would totally stay home. I'm like, well, I love my job, so you keep working, but work here in Austin.
Right. Oh, and my husband's been saying that for years. I mean, it's almost a joke at this point. He's like, well, when you make this level, I think I'll just quit and take care. Well, when you make this level, but he really enjoys his job too, and wants to continue having the impact that he has with his team. One day he's going to be serious, but so far he's not.
All right. Well, I know we're a little bit past time. Actually, I wasn't even watching the time because I was enjoying all this conversation. Any last questions that you all have? Any last things y'all are wanting to hear or know? Minds are all wondering. All right. Well, any last words that Annette, Angela, Chandler, or Pat, you have to share with our fabulous students before we close it up?
I think a lot of this is going to apply to any big compromise decision, coordination, buying a house, having kids. It's, if you don't have that communication and that mutual respect to have a good, you know, trust-based conversation, all of these will be really difficult. And so building that into the relationship up front is going to be key to success in all of these elements.
Agree. It's a great topic. Thank you for, I haven't been a part of any of these, a topic like this at all on a university setting, but I think it's something that needs to be talked about more regularly. So it was really refreshing.
It is. It's a great topic.
It is.
Yep.
I just remember feeling guilty, like when I made the decision to, you know, kind of not really step back from my career, but follow my husband. And I shouldn't have felt guilty.
Don't feel guilty.
It's a partnership. And yeah, I just remember going through school feeling pressure that you got to do you and focus on you. And I just, I wish I would have heard a message like this in my early 20s of this is going to be a partnership, and if
give and take.
Yes. Give and take.
I have a friend who says every time she comes to me for mentoring on, you know, she's about to go have some important job related discussion, she goes, I know they're going to ask me what I want to do next, and I know that trophy wife is not an acceptable answer.
That's funny. That's funny. Oh my goodness.
Thank you for putting this together, because I agree. I can remember being at UT and being in grad school, and that was kind of when we had my husband and I, we were, you know, my boyfriend and I at the time, we had worked through all these things, and it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm taking this job I want. And I remember we both independently actually went and saw a counselor and said, hey, how do we do this? And they're like, you know what I mean? And like, so having some support in some other way, I think would have been really nice to have at that time.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for sharing your stories. Thank you, students, for joining in today. And I think these are all conversations that I'm hoping we can continue as we move forward and continue to bring in our long distance folks, because it's great having you all be able to join in from afar as well.
Yep.
All right. Well, y'all have a fabulous rest of your day. Thanks again for joining in, and hopefully we'll see you at another one soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.